And I think I can say, without exaggeration, that we have entered the most unstable, revolutionary period since the 1920s and 30s.
Hello again, comrades, and welcome to a very special episode of the Revolutionary Communist Podcast.
All of the contradictions of the system that the bourgeoisie were able to kind of hold back are now crashing to the fore. The bourgeoisie are trying everything in their power to save their system, but that is no longer possible.
Last week, we officially launched the Revolutionary Communist Party here in Canada.
Le PCR est arrivé, camarades.
This is the largest communist congress in decades in Canada, and we really need to take this as our task, the task of our generation, to build an organization, to build a party that will lead the working class to victory.
Over 3 days of discussions, we discussed the world crisis of capitalism and the coming wave of revolutions, and we discussed our task as communists in growing from thousands of organized members to a mass force of millions and tens of millions. A force that can win the working class in Canada and abroad and bring about a genuine transformation of society. And after our weekend of discussions, we took to the streets of Montreal to announce that the communists are here, we are coming, and we are a force to be reckoned with. So the RCP has officially planted the red flag on Canadian soil, and now we are looking ahead to the foundation of the Revolutionary Communist International in June. Hello again, comrades, and welcome back to a very special episode of the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. At the time of recording, tomorrow we'll be starting our founding congress for the Revolutionary Communist Party. By the time this episode goes out, we will have founded it officially here in Canada, and we'll be looking onwards to the founding of the Revolutionary Communist International. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to help raise comrades' sights and to answer some fundamental questions about what it means to be founding the RCI. And to help us answer some of these questions, we're joined by Fred Weston, a member of the International Secretariat of the now International Marxist Tendency, the soon-to-be Revolutionary Communist International. Fred, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How was your trip to Montreal so far?
That was a good trip. It wasn't too tiring. And I had some interesting talks, meeting last night with the Montreal comrades, a question and answer session. They asked a lot of questions about all kinds of things, from Palestine to, the future perspectives for a revolutionary communist party, and lots of other questions. And then yesterday I did the podcast in French for the comrades here, on the same subject we're about to embark on today.
Mm-hmm. Lots of questions as well about the international and how work is going across the world in all of our different sections. Maybe a simple question that we can start with is actually, why do we need an international?
Well, we have to start out from the fact that capitalism is a global system. It has sucked in all countries. Every single country on this planet is now part of the capitalist system. It's a system which is dominated by a handful of imperialist countries, the powerful and, more economically developed countries like the United States, Canada, the West European countries, Japan, and others, including China, the recent addition to this list. So the system is global. The economy is a global system, and you can't understand what's happening in any single country unless you have an understanding of the global picture. Trade, world trade, every country is involved in it to one degree or another, and therefore we see, the ups and downs of the world economy affect all countries more or less at the same time or in the same period. And the class that we're up against is an imperialist class. The US imperialists and the others don't operate just in their own country. They operate globally. They also have their centres of study, their strategists, their experts who study the economy and how it's going. They study the political situation. They give advice on how to manage the system in the interests of the capitalist class. But there's another class. It's called the working class. They tell us it doesn't exist. They try and tell us it doesn't exist. When they say that, the first thing I do is I look at this cup of coffee and I think, who made the cup? Who made the coffee? Who transported it? Was it the bourgeois themselves, without workers? It's a load of bunkum. There is a working class, and it's never been so powerful, numerically speaking. We have the strongest working class in the whole history of the system. But of course, the working class is divided along national lines, language and traditions, cultural traditions, etc. And the reality they face is on a national level, obviously. But their interests in all countries are the same. Their interests are, fighting inflation, protecting jobs. And today, especially, there's one key question, I think, which affects all countries, and it's a question which does not recognize borders. It's called climate change, which is significantly impacting the lives of millions of workers in all countries. Droughts, flooding, it's having a dramatic effect. And the answer to this problem can only be found on a global scale. It really does need a world government to sort out this problem. The only class that can genuinely deal with this in a global way is the working class. They're the ones that have the direct interest in solving these problems. So an international organization means uniting the more advanced layers of the working class, the more radicalized, conscious layers of the working class, as a fighting force to change society. Because you cannot solve the problems within the borders of one country. Even if you did, and obviously we're aiming to transform country after country, but let's imagine one single country achieves a socialist transformation, starts running its economy in a rationally planned way under the control of the working class. If it was only in that country, it would come up against all the other countries which are dominated by the capitalist class. And instead of concentrating their forces and energies on solving the problems that face the workers, they'd have to think of how do we defend ourselves against the attacks that these people will inevitably carry out. And therefore, it would have, in order to be successful, a socialist transformation, a genuine workers' revolution, can start in one country, but it can only survive and maintain itself if it spreads to one country after another over a period of time. I mean, it's not all going to happen at 9 o'clock Monday morning. Everybody wakes up and hey, the revolution. But there's going to be countries more advanced in the process that will give a lead, but then they must be followed by others. Otherwise, there is the danger of being defeated by the capitalist class, who consciously study how to avoid the instability, political turmoil, class struggle, and class opposition. They consciously work at it. We have to consciously work in the opposite direction and come together as internationalist communists of all countries with a common goal, which is to change this world. And that's why you need a common international organization.
I guess an example that demonstrates your point that socialism cannot just be developed on a national scale is actually the Soviet Union. Because, the Civil War, 21 invading armies, and the backing of all the Western imperialist powers, it forced the government in the USSR to focus on what was essentially war communism, defending the embryo of the worker state in a besieged fortress. And in some ways, it actually helped to lay the foundation for the bureaucratic degeneration of the Soviet Union down the line a few years later. So I think it's a very important point that we do have to study these examples and see where the limits of these movements are, and the failures of the German, the Italian, and other revolutions in that period, how that paved the way for the reintroduction of capitalism, for the consolidation of the bureaucracy, and so on. One question that I know a lot of people on the left inside our organization, outside our organization, have had recently is this the right time to be founding a new international? Are we being too hasty as a relatively small organization on a global scale? What would your answer be to questions like that?
Well, the question is, when would be the right moment, first of all, and why not now? Now, it's true that you can work in different ways. In effect, we already are an international organization. The International Marxist Tendency has sections in many countries across the world. We've already been working as an international organization. The question is not so much that we're not launching an international from zero. We are launching an organization that's called the Revolutionary Communist International. We've used that name because we want to recall the memory of the Communist International in its best period, the first 4 congresses of the Comintern, the period that you were referring to just now, about when Russia faced attack from all these invading foreign armies aimed at destroying the nation state. If you go back to Lenin, you see what enormous importance he gave to the building of the international. Because Lenin understood that if they did not spread that revolution, then the revolution, not only could it could degenerate bureaucratically, but it could actually be overturned. He actually saw the possible danger of capitalist restoration, even in the 20s. He saw that. That's why he gave such importance, for instance, to discussions at the congresses. He gave huge importance to the German Revolution. Imagine if the German workers had taken power in an advanced capitalist country. First of all, it would have meant the German armies and the German state could not have been used to attack the Soviet Union. On the contrary, it would have been defending the Soviet Union. It would have been in the heart of Europe, and it would have had a powerful impact across Europe and would have facilitated, actually, revolutions across Europe, which would have completely transformed the situation the Soviet Union found itself in. Instead of being one isolated, backward economy, desperately trying to build up its productive forces while being attacked and therefore having to concentrate its forces militarily, producing guns and weapons instead of tractors and combine harvesters, let's put it that way. It actually had a negative effect on the Soviet Union. But Lenin gave a lot of importance to this question. Lenin would never have imagined the idea of building socialism in one country. In fact, you read his speeches, his interventions, it's all about internationalism. Lenin, like all the great Marxists, understood what I said at the beginning. You cannot build socialism in an isolated country. The class struggle is an international struggle. So he put all his effort into building the Communist International. Now, what happened subsequently, I don't think the place here to go into a deep analysis of the Stalinist degeneration and the reasons for it. There are articles, we've got whole books on it. You can read Ted Grant's Russia from Revolution to Counter-Revolution if you want a deep analysis of that, or Trotsky's Revolution Betrayed. There's plenty of texts that our listeners can delve into to get a deeper understanding of that. But let's put it this way. The genuine revolutionary international that Lenin built subsequently became just a mouthpiece of the Russian bureaucracy. In the 1930s, it was no longer a genuine international where you had genuine internal debate, discussions about tactics, etc. And in 1943, Stalin had no problem in simply signing the dissolution of that organization without even bothering to call a congress and to consult the members. Do you want to dissolve it? No. He just dissolved it because he had an alliance with the Americans and the British. And that was the end from an organizational point of view. From a political point of view, that organization ceased to be revolutionary by the end of the 20s. Now, that's why we've adopted the name Revolutionary Communist International, because it's to hark back to the revolutionary period of the Comintern, of the Communist International. Now, why today? You asked the question. Well, you see, as Marxists, you have to be able to read the mood that's out there, to read changes in the situation. Some people say, oh, you've changed your methods and your tactics. At last, you've woken up. No, we've been awake for many decades. And we realize what the situation was back then, and we realize what it is now. What has happened is events have taken place. And events change the objective situation and can change consciousness. Now, we're not saying that millions and millions of workers in every country tomorrow morning are ready to join the communists. That would be complete misreading of reality. Anybody can see that. But that's not the point. We're not out to build a mass international tomorrow morning. The aim of this organization is to gather together all those individual loose communists, people who genuinely see themselves as communists, i.e. they want to fight to remove capitalism and achieve a genuine socialist society run by the working class, under the control of the working class democratically, and put an end to the nightmare of capitalism. Now, a layer has emerged in the last few years that is thinking along those lines. We can see it, we detect it when we're intervening on campuses, outside workplaces, when we do stalls, when we intervene in strikes, etc. There is a layer, let's call it a more advanced layer, a more conscious layer, that is looking for a revolutionary communist alternative. Now, how did that layer emerge? Well, you see, history has an impact on reality, historical events. If you think there's a generation alive today, we're in 2024, that, anybody who's 20 or even 30, in reality, their conscious life has been one of a crisis of the system, an economic crisis, financial crisis, political turmoil, instability, wars, climate change and the impacts of that. It's a world in turmoil that this young generation is living through. Another side of it is, you look at the situation young people face today. There was a time in which young people, well, my generation, could actually imagine getting a mortgage, getting a house, doing what your family tells you to do, settle down, get a family, get a serious job. The possibilities are there. Work hard and you'll get a good life. That's gone.
That's a fantasy for my generation.
Yeah, the idea that you can get a mortgage now. To get a mortgage now, you need a significant backing, say, of parents who can give you a bit of money, and a very well-paid job, and a very safe job. Most young people are working in precarious jobs, part-time contracts, short-term contracts, low wages, zero-hour contracts, etc. The cost of a house has gone through the sky. It's just skyrocketed. It's not something they can imagine saving the money for. And on top of that, they have to live in rented accommodation, which is extremely expensive. Eats up all your wages. They can't save the money. So the idea that they can get a property and become, a member of, the middle classes, as they would like people to believe, and on top of that, a safe world to live in without wars, without inflation, without joblessness or precarious work conditions, a world where you don't have climate change threatening your future. That's a pipe dream. The reality is a stark one. But there's another element to this. In 2008, there was a crisis of the system. It wasn't the first one, but it was let's put it away. It put an end to some of the illusions that existed previously that capitalism was doing okay. As long as you worked hard, you could still, you can get you can get on. That was broken by the 2008 financial crisis. And they've had ups and downs. They've had economic recoveries. Capitalism is always up and down. There's always a cycle to it. But as a system globally, it has not recovered from 2008. The massive overhang of debt in the system, the constant austerity measures to try and reduce this debt, which is producing a situation of bad healthcare, bad education, precarious living conditions. All of this, 2008, with a bit of a delay, did produce political radicalization. Let's remind ourselves of what happened roughly, let's say, about 10 years ago, 2015, 16. Look, just quickly, a quick trip around the world. In America, we had Bernie Sanders attracting hundreds of thousands of people in stadiums, talking about the political revolution against the billionaire class and talking about socialism in his way. There was a moment in which he was enormously popular. and a lot of people look to him. At the same time, we had Corbyn phenomenon in Britain. The Labour Party was radically transformed. Corbyn attracted hundreds of thousands of members to the Labour Party who liked what he was saying. He was saying, defend the NHS, fund it, renationalise the railways, stop the austerity. It's what people wanted to hear. Now, that's where the bourgeois actually got a shock. When he appeared on TV as a candidate for leadership, they didn't realise how popular he would become simply by opposing what they were doing. The others were all in line with the needs of the bourgeois. Corbyn became party leader. The Labour Party was shifted radically to the left. That happened in Britain. In Greece, Syriza, a party of 4%, always depicted as the far left, which, of course, it was not. We know that. But that's not how it was seen. It was presented as the far left, and from 4% was catapulted to 36% and a massive parliamentary group and formed the government. That's how rapidly things can change, actually. That's how a supposedly insignificant little party of so-called communists, because they didn't, they were more like the Euro-communist right wing of the movement, but they were presented like that. If you tell working class people for year after year, they're communists, they're bad, they'll do this, they'll do that, oh, revolution. Well, when the capitalist system goes into a deep crisis like the one the Greeks faced, what did the Greek people do? Let's try these so-called, these communists. Let's see what they're like. And Syriza was catapulted into government. At the same time, very briefly, you had Podemos rising from nothing to a mass force in Spain. In France, you had the Mélenchon phenomenon of, around France Insoumise, and similar. Here in Canada, you had Québec Solidaire, and you could find other examples. It was a generalized process. It wasn't just one country. You see, sometimes you can have a particular phenomenon in one country, but when you see it repeated, slightly different versions, but more or less the same kind of expression of a radicalization to the left through these kind of leaders, there was something taking place in the consciousness of millions of people around the world. But let's fast forward just a little bit. What happened to all of these people? Well, in America, we know what Bernie Sanders did. He forgot about the billionaire class and the revolution against them, and he just towed the line of the Democratic Party. Now he's just a very mildly left of Biden. Occasionally makes a little bit of noise about this or that. He enormously disappointed the hundreds of thousands. I would hazard several million probably people in America who were looking to him. In Britain, Corbyn succumbed to the pressures of the right wing. In what sense? Well, they've invented this anti-Semitism. You would think that anti-Semitism was crawling out of every piece of furniture you're sitting on. Every wall has it seeping out as a phenomenon. Millions of people are affected by it. I ask myself, where are they? I have yet to meet they do exist. They're on the right wing. They're the far right. They're the real anti-Semites, the Nazi types, the fascist types. On the left, what you have is genuine sympathy for Palestinians who are being bombed and butchered. That is not anti-Semitism. To be opposed to Netanyahu and what he's doing, to be opposed to the Zionist regime in Israel, to be opposed to Biden's support for the bombing of Gaza is not anti-Semitism. But they've invented this thing to throw it at the left. They threw it at Corbyn, and Corbyn's advisors, what did they tell him to do? Instead of fighting back, what he should have done is gone on TV and said, this is absolute nonsense. What are you talking about? Anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. If there was of all the mass parties in Britain, the racist party is the Tory party. They're full of them. The Labour Party is anti-racist. Historically speaking, it was the party of the working class. Now, in a party of hundreds of thousands, you may occasionally find a handful. There's always a few odd types, but not generalized anti-Semitism of any kind. What did he do? He was told to apologize. That's the best thing to do. As soon as he apologized, he sent out a message that, you got something to apologize for. So there is a problem. And there was all the investigations. They destroyed Corbyn with that campaign. Corbyn succumbed to this. and especially the people around him, his advisors. And he lost the battle against the right wing. There was a moment in which he had massive support. He could have completely taken over the Labour Party. He had it within his grasp. Now, that would have provoked a split with the right wing. That's what would have happened. For fear of that, can't split the party, because if we split, we'll give the Tories victory in elections always, etc. The result was he compromised, the right wing took control. And look at what they did. They're ruthless. Starmer has no concerns about democracy and the rights of party members. He just started expelling left, right and centre. And he understood, expel one and 100 will leave in disgust. And hundreds of thousands have left the Labour Party. That's what happened in Britain. Very quickly, in Greece, Syriza went into government, carried out the austerity, in spite of a referendum which said the majority of the Greek people were against that policy. Carried it out. Podemos launched to the heights and then compromised with the ruling class. Everywhere, in one way or another, these left reformist leaders, let's say, in effect betrayed their supporters and betrayed the hopes and aspirations. And then we have, the Tories continuing to govern. Biden is in government in America. In Greece, Syriza eventually lost the elections, and now we have the right-wing conservatives, New Democracy in power. Everywhere, they've given back the initiative to the right wing. But that hasn't been wasted on the consciousness, you see. There is a layer, particularly of young people, who have gone beyond those reformists now. We noticed it when we were selling papers or distributing leaflets, talking to young people. And I remember a lot of reports, young people would say, "Are you socialists?" Or, "Because I'm a communist." What it meant was, are you those people that betray? Are you those wishy-washy, softy lefts who, when it comes down to, when the chips are down, you always end up not leading the fight and betraying? Or are you real fighters? Are you communists? Are you revolutionaries? And it was, I don't know how to describe it. It was like very refreshing to get the reports, but also perfectly logical when we looked at it. Yes, there is a layer that's gone beyond the left reformists. The point is this: there is no party that really is able to coalesce this layer into an organized political force. That's why we drew the conclusion. First of all, we launched the Are You a Communist campaign, in effect testing the ground. Posters, stickers. It was hugely, enormously successful. In Britain, we got hundreds, thousands of write-ins of people scanning the barcode and saying, "Yes, I'm a communist." They wanted to know about us, what our program was. They wanted to join. Hundreds joined over a year. The same thing happened in Canada. The same thing happened in the United States. And it's happening in all our sections to one degree or another. We have sections that have doubled their membership. Some of them more than doubled their membership in a year. A huge increase in membership, particularly of young people looking for a revolutionary communist organization. That's why we're launching this organization with this name, this identity, and with a different approach also to the way you would intervene in the movement. In the Palestine movement, where we have student comrades with a significant force on a campus. We haven't just waited around for an encampment to start. In some of them, we've launched the idea from the beginning. We've promoted it. We've reached out to other forces, to Palestinian solidarity groups, etc. And why? Because, again, objectively speaking, there is a need for it. There is a huge layer of youth who want to do something to stop the butchery in Palestine. And that explains the encampments. Again, you see, you can have 6 or 7 months of demonstration after demonstration, speeches, rallies, etc. But the war continues. The number of killed is moving towards the 40,000, over 100,000 injured. The death and destruction in Gaza. Ordinary, healthy young people cannot sit by and just see that happen and think, "Oh yeah, move on to next business." They are disgusted, they are angry, and they want to do something. And they think it's not enough simply to march once a week or once every 2 weeks. We've got to do more. So they've tried to act within their own countries by blocking the universities, occupying the campuses, and putting pressure on the authorities to break with Israel, to break their contracts with Israel, to break their contracts with companies involved in the genocide. They've started to demand, disclose. That's another way of saying open the books, a slogan that's in Trotsky's transitional program. When there's a crisis, the first thing is to say, right, you say there's a problem, open the books, let us see the accounts. Where's the money coming from? Where's our money going? Where's the university spending its money? Are you spending it in anything connected to the genocide in Gaza? That's got to stop. You've got to divest. We threw ourselves into this and said, yes, we want to stop them. How? And that's why, this is a separate discussion, the question of how to strengthen the movement, how to build it, how to spread it, etc. But there's a layer of young people that want to move in that direction, which means, in effect, in a revolutionary direction. And we found lots of young people involved in the Palestine Solidarity who also identify as communists, as revolutionaries. So the Revolutionary Communist International is an organization which appeals to this layer and says, as individuals, you can achieve not very much, but in unity, you find strength, i.e., all these individuals coming together as one force, we can create, to begin with, a small revolutionary party with a clear identity, with a clear program, with a clear approach, intervening in the struggles of youth and workers, and building up the party. Because we need to build a voice of revolutionary communism which can be heard. When you're too small, the problem is your voice isn't very strong, and you can only reach the people you physically can contact. The bigger you become, the more attention is paid to you, the more notice is taken of you, and the more you start to become at least a small factor in the situation. People know you exist. When a problem comes up, when there's a crisis over something, the conservatives will say something, liberals will say something, the social democrats. The revolutionary communists also have something to say. Now, many people will probably think, yeah, that's what they say, it's too far, I don't know. But a layer will join and make us stronger. And eventually, as the crisis unfolds, you see, I always say to people that they say we're too extreme. I say, I'm not concerned with that opinion. I understand where you come from. You think we can change society slowly, gradually, through compromises here and there. But I'm convinced that the crisis of the system is going to push that layer also to the left in the future, because they will understand that attempt to small changes here and there, that sort of to tinker with the system, won't work. It can't work. At the moment, many people think that they can. Time will show that it can't be done, and that's when to have a significant force on the left with a revolutionary communist identity, with a clear program, can start to attract a much bigger force. That's why it makes sense to launch the Revolutionary Communist International today, in the conditions of today. The first task is gather all those communists together, make them into a force, make it into a stronger voice, and then intervene in the class struggle. When there's strikes, we'll be on the picket lines. When there are encampments, we'll be there, helping out, but also explaining our ideas at the same time, and building up our forces, getting stronger, to the point where we can be heard by millions. That's the long-term aim. And provide the working class with an organization that can give it a way out of the crisis we're living in, and build a genuine revolutionary communist international organization.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just to add on one thing that you said with the encampment movement, I think that that's actually a perfect demonstration of the fact that revolutionary movements like this, they do not adhere to national boundaries. Mm-hmm. It started at Columbia University. It spread like wildfire across the United States. And then within a couple of weeks, you saw encampments in Canada, across Europe, as far as New Zealand and Australia. I've seen videos of German police officers beating student protesters wearing their keffiyehs, sitting outside of parliamentary buildings. If the struggle is unfolding on a national scale, we need to have a national perspective. And I know here in the Canadian section, we've learned an immense number of lessons from our American comrades, from comrades across the country, from Europe as well. There needs to be an organization that can synthesize all of these experiences and share the best lessons with every different national section. There is a bit of a contradiction here, I think, in that for people who are coming in for the first time, they're meeting, say, the Revolutionary Communist Party here in Canada. They tend to only be introduced to us under our national banner, see our national works, attend our national congress. It might be difficult to understand in especially these early days. How does the international work? What does this look like, on an international scale? How would you explain that to them?
Well, for example, we had the events at Columbia University, and we saw the brutal repression. Then we saw it spreading. As Marxists, we study history, not for academic reasons, although history is an interesting subject in itself. We study it to learn the lessons of previous events. We had the events in the 60s, especially around 1968. You see, 1968 wasn't just a French movement, May 68. 68 was an international movement. It was the Mexican movement. It was the Pakistan movement. It was Italy. It was everywhere, the United States, everywhere. It reflected a crisis of the system globally, which produced similar movements across the globe. And because you have similar conditions, when one country starts, it can spread very quickly to others. Therefore, you study what happened in the encampments in the United States, both the positive aspects but also the limitations. You can draw lessons, you can develop, let's say, a method of intervening, which is the most efficient possible, and you can look at what happened in America and then talk to the Canadian comrades. Look, this has the potential to spill over the border. I remember these discussions we had with the Canadian comrades. Very quickly it happened. Learn the lessons of how students mobilized in the United States. The way the police were intervened, the way it was spread, the kind of debates they were having. And then we discussed, this has the potential to jump right across the Atlantic Ocean. And very quickly we started seeing one encampment after another in the United Kingdom, in Britain. And then we saw in Paris, and we saw it in Rome, we saw it in Milan. There are now encampments in Italy, as you said, Australia, and many other countries. Now, there are similar traits to these movements, and therefore you can, as a collectively organized international, you can pull together the experiences, and you can sharpen your analysis as a consequence, because it's not just limited to one national phenomenon. It becomes more global. And you can also sharpen the way you intervene, how best to connect with the movement. We saw, for example, that this demand, disclose and divest, which is basically saying, as I said before, show us the accounts and stop all the connections with Israel. We said this is a positive development when it's taken up by a mass movement. It's not just a tiny little group of activists. It's a mass phenomenon, and it's a healthy development. So we say what communists should be doing is explaining how to strengthen the movement, how to escalate it, how to spread it, how to make it more, how to make it stronger so they actually can impact on the authorities. But that requires involving the working class and making it a generalized movement. And at the end of the day, let's talk honestly here. In the United States, the encampment movement has already ebbed. It's going down in some campuses. It's gone right down. In Canada, because it started a bit later, it's still there, but also here you can see it's becoming weaker. But that's always the case. The idea that you can have a permanent movement, it's just outside of reality. And in other countries like Britain, it was spreading. It's a significant movement. But what we can see, look at America, you can see, it had a peak, and then it's starting to go down. Well, that's going to happen in Canada, it's going to happen in Britain. The question is this: when it was at its strongest, what should have been done to make it stronger? Now, the role of revolutionary communists is to look at that. Now, this movement could ebb, but the war in Gaza is not going anywhere. It's actually getting worse. The attack on Rafah, the increasing civilian deaths. The consciousness that produced the encampments is not going to wither away. In actual fact, I think it spreads and gets stronger. The anger is still there. The conditions that created those massive rallies in support, simply because a movement continues for week after week, and physically you can understand why you can't keep up a momentum of 1 million strong rallies every week. It's just not physically possible. That doesn't mean that the anger has gone away. That doesn't mean that those millions of people that took part in those rallies have changed their mind about Gaza. They're still angry, and they're probably even angrier, but also sometimes frustrated. We did all this, and yet it still didn't have an effect. We didn't stop those bastards from what they're doing. That means that a lot of them will have to start thinking more politically. What else can I do to stop this butchery? And what we say is, look, so long as the United States is governed and controlled by a powerful capitalist class, a powerful imperialist force, which uses the wealth created by the richest country on the planet to give billions of dollars to Israel, billions of dollars worth of armaments, of powerful weapons. America the United States provides like close to 70% of the imports of arms to Israel. So long as the German ruling class continues to give huge armaments, the Italians also significant amount of weapons. But so long as the British, all these governments, so long as the power is in the hands of the capitalist class, they will govern society in the interests of profit. Armaments are enormously profitable. So the encampment movement was a threat to that. If it had become a generalized movement that had spilt over into the working class, like in '68, and had provoked that, had let's say, led to the mass movement of the working class, that would have been a real threat to the ruling class. Now, it's not enough just to threaten the ruling class. We've got to organize to change society. Imagine a United States under the control of the American working class. Imagine these enormous resources in the hands of the American working class. The American working class would use these resources not to send billions to Netanyahu. They would use it to build hospitals, schools, better housing, and globally, actually, to help the people around the world to solve their problems, such as the Palestinians, for example, who could do with enormous help to rebuild their destroyed land, to create the conditions for a civilized existence for Palestinians, and throughout the whole Middle East. What it means is we have to change society. We have to remove capitalism and the class that governs. So long as they stay in power, there will be, unfortunately, more bombings of Gaza. Rafah is going to continue. They're going to increase the deaths. It's tragic to see 40,000 people being killed and the number injured. That will continue. When these movements can appear, they can become strong. They can recede because there's no leadership. There's no organized attempt to spread it. The ruling class count on this. They look at movements and they think, well, they've repressed, and they realize that repression provokes a wider movement. And then you notice in Canada they've repressed in some campuses, but in others they've adopted the tactic of just let them get on with it and slowly wait for it to get weaker and tired out, and eventually it'll just be a handful of people that don't affect our interests. In order to stop them, we have to create a movement that threatens their power and change society. A genuine workers' Canada, a workers' United States, or let's put it this way, Egypt, for example. 80 million people live in Egypt. Half the Arab world is actually in Egypt. It's a powerful working class. I'll tell you something. Imagine, instead of al-Sisi, you had a genuine workers' Egypt, an Egypt governed by the Egyptian workers. Imagine the Gaza situation. It would be very different. A workers' Egypt would not collaborate with Israel in keeping the crossing closed or policing the Palestinians. A workers' Egypt would be providing enormous aid to the Palestinians of all kinds. It would be a powerful ally in the struggle of the Palestinians for their national rights. The same would apply to Jordan. And the thing is, these countries are governed by despotic regimes who are friends and puppets, in effect, of the American imperialists, of the European imperialists. They work together to defend the privileges of the rich in Egypt and the privileges of the rich in America, and they collaborate against the American workers and the Egyptian workers. Therefore, the class struggle and the transformation of society on an international scale would put an end to the system that supports the butchery in Gaza. And it would actually mean the end of the Netanyahu government. It would mean the end of the Zionist regime as a regime which is based not on defending the rights of individual Jewish people. Nobody denies the rights of Jewish people. They suffered historically, we know that. It's not about that. It's putting an end to a regime which is based on stealing the land of another people. That's what has to be put an end to. That can only be achieved by putting an end to the system that creates those conditions. That is capitalism on a global scale. And we need all those young communists, all those communist workers. I've met, I also have my local branch. I do paper sales. I meet people on the streets. I talk to them. I've recruited young people to the organization. And it's refreshing when you talk to a young person that says, yes, of course I'm a communist. Or at least they want to understand. And when you explain how capitalism works, they get it straight away. And they want to be part of this, and they want to help to build. They're out there. We need to find them and bring them in and build a stronger organization and build well-educated Marxist cadres who can talk to the working class, who can intervene on a picket line, who can intervene in a student assembly, who can talk to people about the crisis that we're facing and why we have this crisis and what the answers are. We need lots of those kind of comrades joining our organization and help to work, to do this systematic work of taking this message out to working class people. That's what the Revolutionary Communist Party is about in Canada. We just launched it in Britain. We're going to launch it in many other countries. And that's what the Revolutionary Communist International is about, building this necessary force that can create a party that can explain to working class people why there's this crisis. It's not a question of, you don't go to workers and tell them things are bad. They know it already. It's like telling people when it's raining that it's raining, by the way. We want to understand why it rains, how the climate works and what's behind it. In the same way, we want to know, why is there a crisis? Why is there an economic crisis? Why are they cutting back all the funding for social welfare and healthcare and housing, etc.? Why are they funding wars? Why are there conflicts between the imperialist powers over spheres of influence? Why are they fighting over markets? It's because each imperialist power is defending its profits, the privileges of its ruling class. And we have to explain why this is, how the system works, why it goes into crisis, but also how we can put an end to this and how we can solve these problems, which is the working class as a class must govern in the interests of the working class, not in the interests of the profit of the few. The working class creates the wealth. I was watching one of our comrades, Fiona, from the British section, debating with Suella Braverman on a TV channel. Suella Braverman pointed at the comrades' shoes and clothes and said, "You're benefiting from capitalism," as if workers who wear shoes and wear clothes are benefiting from capitalism. Fiona did say, yeah, it's all produced by the workers, by the way. The capitalists try and claim that they're the ones who produce this. No, it's not. It's the millions of workers that produce the wealth in society. It's appropriated by the capitalists and used by them, but the workers produce. What we say is those who produce the wealth should have power over what is done with that wealth, how it's invested, with what program, with what aims, and that can only be a genuine socialist society run by the working class democratically, with workers' control of the industries, of the economy, and a planning of those resources in the interests of working class people across all countries. That's the answer we have to give in our daily activities. When you're selling papers, when you're intervening, when you're talking to people on encampments, discuss this and raise people's horizons, raise their understanding of why all this is happening. And that's why we need this kind of organization.
And these ideas, these perspectives, they haven't fallen out of the sky. They've developed over hundreds of years from Marx and Engels through Lenin, Trotsky. And our tendency has spent decades defending and developing these ideas themselves. But in order to make these ideas into a real political force, it needs the working class. It needs to become the perspective of a mass international force.
Yes.
In your opinion, what would it take to build the RCI or the forces of Marxism around the world into a genuine mass international?
Well, you see, there are two sides to this. One is the preparatory work, what we're doing today. Developing the ideas, publishing and the analysis. I mean, we publish a daily website with analysis of, we've analyzed the Gaza war in detail. We've analyzed the Ukraine war in detail. We analyzed the relationship between China and the United States, world events, etc. We have to educate our own comrades and the periphery around us in an analysis, a concrete analysis of the reality of capitalist society, and build up that organization. How would a future mass revolutionary communist international emerge? It's not within our powers to do that tomorrow morning. Communists do not create revolutions. We prepare to intervene in revolutions. Revolutions are the mass revolutionary uprisings and movements of the mass of workers who will move whether we are there or not. We've had many revolutionary events in history. The tragedy is that, like the German Revolution of 1918 or the Spanish Revolution of 1936 or May 68 in France, many historical events where the working class has risen up as a mass force with a huge potential to transform society. But the leadership of the working class was in the hands of the Social Democrats, the Reformists, the Stalinists, who adopted basically a reformist outlook in the post-war period. The leadership of the working class, instead of working to strengthen that movement, they worked to limit it and pull it back and stabilize the system in favor of the capitalist class. Now, history shows us that there are going to be many movements. It will happen again. But it also shows that if the revolutionary communists are a significant force before that happens, then they can start to connect with the wider working class. Our task today is to become an organization of several thousand. That's the immediate objective. That is possible. That can be done through the practical intervention on the ground, on the encampments. When there's a picket line, go to the picket lines, talk to the workers. When there are workers' demonstrations, go there, talk to people, meet the ones who are interested in genuine communism, and win them over and become a force. The mass revolutionary communist international will be created by events. It's historical events that create mass organizations. What are we talking about in terms of historical events? Well, we're talking about mass class struggle. It will start with strikes of one sector. In Britain, we've had a number of strikes: the nurses, the doctors, the transport workers, the railway workers, the teachers, the bus workers, the refuse collectors. There's been a number of strikes which revealed the genuine discontent within the working class. if you observe how the trade union leaders behave, very often they behave in a way of, when they're really forced to, they call strikes, obviously, because they're pressurized by the ranks. But they try and bring the movement back away from generalizing it into a mass movement of the working class. And they succeed most often in doing that. But all that does is it puts the pressure back in the box, you can say. But then it increases and increases, and history shows that a point is reached where a spark can set ablaze the whole situation. The working class can erupt in mass struggle, and we've seen it many times. History is full of this. That is going to happen, and it's in those conditions that a small revolutionary communist party, by small I'm not talking about a few hundred, I'm talking about thousands, 10, 20,000, could become much, much bigger. Because then, you see, what happens then is what seems extreme today, tomorrow becomes the most logical thing to do. What today seems the most logical, which is, well, a bit at a time, negotiate, compromise, it doesn't achieve anything. When you keep repeating something over and over again and it fails to work, and actually the situation gets worse, the economy gets worse, the inflation, the joblessness, the wars, etc., the instability. At a certain point, quantity becomes quality. When the working class have had too much of this, their anger reaches a point where the movement starts to generalize. In those conditions, you can envisage developing a mass revolutionary communist party. Then you would be in business, as we say. You'd have a massive voice, and such a party would not be just counting on its own members. It would have a much wider support within the working class and the youth. And then you'd start to become a force to reckon within society, and you could lead mass movements to change and radically change the system. You could lead a movement of occupation of factories, for example, occupation of the campuses, which would have a huge impact on consciousness and would eventually lead to the conclusion we have to change society radically. We have to expropriate the multinational corporations, the big corporations, nationalize them, form a workers' government, a genuine workers' government based on the working class, take over the resources and plan them under the democratic control of the working class. That is possible, but you need to have a mass force to do that, and before you can do that, you have to do the meticulous day-to-day work of gathering together the communists that exist today as a force and educating that party in the perspectives of the future. It's not going to be done overnight. This is not a walk in the park. This is a long-term struggle, but the final aim is a mass revolutionary communist party with mass support, which can give leadership to the working class. That's the final objective, obviously.
Fred, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening, comrades. If you agreed with what you heard and you want to help us build the Revolutionary Communist International, then I would encourage you to register for the founding conference of the RCI. On Monday, June 10th, we will officially be launching the International Party of Communism. Over the next 4 days, we'll have a series of discussions on all of the fundamental ideas of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. And we'll be concluding the conference with a discussion on building the RCI in countries all over the globe. It is going to be a week packed with theoretical and practical lessons that all communists can learn from. So, register for the Revolutionary Communist International. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. And join the Revolutionary Communist Party here in Canada. Help us topple this rotten system once and for all.